Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman, and today we are rejoined by guest Rob Gonnella to discuss how you test changes to underlying infrastructure. So it's an interesting problem that we've encountered recently where, hey, if you change your database from one SQL version to another, say MySQL to Aurora, it will mostly work correctly, but there'll be some edge cases stuff that could trip you up. But your unit tests won't catch that because your unit tests don't test the database server unless unless your unit tests are more integration tests. Uh, Likewise, if you were to change your messaging platform, right, if you switch from, let's say, Kafka to RabbitMQ, maybe there's something there beyond the putting and getting messages off the queue that will screw things up, but you wouldn't notice because you're not going to test Kafka or RabbitMQ itself, other than can you put the messages on and get them off. So, Rob, thank you. Welcome back.
Good to be
Yeah,
here. Glad to be
I
back.
have heard that you've spent many months working on this exact problem recently.
Similar problem, not quite the database, but yeah, sort of. I'm not going to say rewriting, but replacing
Yeah.
the sort of heart of our system over to something different. And the only thing I can say is you really have to spend the time building up the infrastructure you need to add appropriate integration and end-to-end tests. And I always like to reference back to the pyramid of tests that you should have, the types of tests, where the top of the pyramid is your end-to-end tests, where you have a much smaller amount of them, and then the next layer is your integration test. You have more of those, and then obviously the most amount of testing you should have should be in unit tests. But like you said, in these cases, unit tests just aren't enough, right? You got to have those integration and or end-to-end tests. And that's what I did for this problem that I had recently, which was we had no end-to-end test coverage, and I needed to make a big change that was risky. So I spent months building up infrastructure first to be able to end-to-end test the product, then many more weeks adding actual end-to-end tests, and then changing the code and breaking it and being like, okay, here's the bugs. Here's where I'm getting my feedback from the system saying,
Can you clarify? So, did you build like a staging test environment that was persistent, or were you able to build it into like your build pipeline so that it did full regression tests every build?
What I did first was develop it locally, right? Just using Docker Compose, things like that, to be able to stand up. Basically, Docker Compose, local stack, Docker and local stack can get you a lot, get you almost all the way there, if not all the way there. Local stack is a great tool. I recommend it. We're all working in cloud environments these days for the most part. So when you need AWS specific infrastructure, SQS databases, you want to, I don't know that you'll get exactly every difference between Aurora or MySQL Community or whatever, but most things you can cover. And even for database things like that, I'm sure you could pull in, a representative image that's close enough that gets you the testing you need. Can't cover everything all the time, but the goal is to get as much feedback from the system as you possibly can. And that's going to cover a lot. That it's just going to increase your confidence that your changes are not going to fail in unexpected ways.
Okay, interesting. And then that still leaves you running things manually. Did you automate it from there, or?
Yeah, from there. So first I got it working locally, got some tests going. You got to start small because it's just too big of a problem to try to be like, I'm going to go straight to the CI pipeline and automate everything. So get it working locally and then start picking apart the problem as to how do I run this in a pipeline or how do I automate it in some way. What I wound up doing was got it running locally, created some scripts so that other developers could also stand it up locally, then started, stepping back from there and being like, okay, now that I've got it so that it works on other people's machines, what do I really need for it to work on, in a CI pipeline in a cloud? And then it really wasn't much tinkering from there to get that to work.
Oh, I love that middle step there. because that wasn't obvious. Of get it working locally and then get it working in the pipeline. But no, get it working for other people and their machines, because then you get humans who will give you feedback much
Yep.
much more intelligently and
And
angrily.
I'll say, that comes from a little bit of experience with creating review environments and having other developers kind of feel like that it was too abstracted away. So what we had done in the past was we would set up CI pipelines that would automatically deploy review environments.
Mm-hmm.
And we found that a lot of our developers weren't using them because it was just sort of too much magic, where like magically the CI pipeline created this review environment and they didn't really know what it was or how to interact with it. And, we provided documentation and everything, but I think it was just too abstracted away from them.
So wait, I'm not super familiar with the idea of a review environment. I can guess from the name, it must be that you build the pipeline succeeds and then you push a container or something so that you can work on that exact pipeline or that
Yes,
branch.
right. Well, the idea is that it's a per, pull request or um,
Merge request.
yeah, pull request or merge request, depending on
PR
which.
or MR, depending on if you're
Right, right,
GitHub or
right.
GitLab.
Exactly. So you can stand up an environment for each one of those that the developer or reviewer or whoever can interact with prior to the code being merged.
Oh, that is neat.
Yeah, it comes in really useful when it's really useful when things need to kind of be verified before being merged to some degree. Or what I found was, again, because it was too abstracted away from the developers, they wound up not using it very much. I decided to take a different approach and give them a script to be able to manually stand up their review environment from command line and interact with it from command line. And I found I got way more engagement from our developers doing that.
So in this case, it's the same idea, but you let them do it from their terminals
Yep.
on demand.
Yep. And basically, I just created a little CLI around this tool that allowed them to easily interact with the review environment and kind of gave them some immediate ways to just get their hands in it and type, dash dash help and be like, what can I do? And then it just generated more engagement, and it worked.
Yes, always implement dash dash help.
Yeah. Always.
Awesome. In your case that you've been working recently, what type of infrastructure were you migrating from and to?
So,
If you can say.
yeah, I can. We wanted to move to a more queue processing approach. We had built up an initial system that stored a bunch of data in a database and then had a bunch of crons that would periodically run, look for data of a certain type, and process it. And we wanted to move away from that, from the cron piece of it, towards more of, this data gets, an event happens, we save some data in the database and add a bunch of stuff, add a bunch of jobs to the queue to go be processed at whatever time. And the logic around the processing we were doing was pretty complicated and just had to be right. Things couldn't run out of order or, but there was a lot of room for things to be able to be parallelized, which is why we wanted to kind of move away from the cron and get more towards this queue thing. But it had to be right.
I can imagine if you've got ordering and you're adding parallelization, that smells like it smells like a really easy place to make a mistake.
Yeah, and ultimately it was like a bunch of big chunks that had to happen in order, but within those big chunks was the room for a lot of parallelization. You know what I mean? The individual jobs could run in parallel, but the big stages had to be in order.
Right, you needed sync steps, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So what kind of, as you're testing this out and other bugs are being exposed, what kind of things did you catch from setting up your own local review environments and this own kind of testing infrastructure around your
Yeah,
infrastructure?
I found actually a couple of areas that couldn't be parallelized, for one, which was a very important find. Um, and had I not had end-to-end tests in place, it would have just crashed in production. And I wound up having to find a few ways to like refactor those spots so that they could be parallelized or just handle it slightly differently. Um, Other things is again because we never rewrite, right? So I'm supporting sort of both paths at the same time and trying to intelligently refactor and cut over piece by piece. Um, there was just a bit of shifting, not so much of what's happening in the logic, but where it's happening, so that both systems can call the same methods,
Hmm.
right? But anytime you do that, you do open the doors for little bugs to creep in. You're not changing the logic, but it's just different enough, and it's really hard to foresee what, it looks like you didn't change anything, but you did.
I've introduced plenty of bugs by reordering things that didn't seem like the order mattered, like in code.
Yep,
I'm like, well, I didn't change anything. So, oh, well, there's this subtle side effect over here.
exactly.
Yeah.
And having those end-to-end tests in place that are like, we do this and we should see this happen in the database, and it would be close but not the same, and you're like, well, then it's broken.
Right.
Right.
Awesome. So to summarize, the way you change your infrastructure is with the testing pyramid, where you need to make sure that you've got those integrations and end-to-end tests working. And if you don't have that, the best way to go about getting it is get it working locally, get it working for the other developers, and then get it working in the build pipeline.
Yeah, that's the approach that seemed to work for me. And this is, of
Awesome.
course, this is for a case where you're doing something drastic like switching out your database or the heart of the system in some way. For other infrastructure changes, you may not need a full end-to-end test infrastructure. Doing something like we've done in other places where we switch something from deploying on an EC2 instance to deploying to EKS. You can do something a little more simple where you're just directing 10% of the traffic to EKS first, and then gradually bumping it up. And that's something that's easy to roll back if needed,
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't say every infrastructure change calls for end-to-end test infrastructure, but some I would say do.
Well, a phased rollout is really testing in production.
Yeah,
Nice.
it is, but um, it would be really hard to write end to end. I don't know. I'm not even sure you can write an end to end test for that because you're not changing anything code wise in the app,
Right.
right?
That is the
So,
struggle.
right. I mean, your your tests at that point are like roll it out in staging. Is staging okay? Okay, staging seems okay. Or let's do 10% of the traffic in production. Then I don't know that there's much more you can do besides that.
Yeah. I saw a great quote once that I have didn't write down, so I don't know who said it, but it was everyone has a test environment. Some people also have a production environment.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Is
true.
it fair to say that the testing pyramid, in this case, with the thinnest topmost part being the end test, is slightly skewed for infrastructure changes? If it like the pyramid goes kind of curves a little bit to where like the
Oh,
end tests are slightly more
it
for
forks out.
infrastructure changes.
Hmm.
Like you'd want more, for example.
Oh, you mean in terms of importance?
Importance in the number of tests that you might want for infrastructure changes. It sounds like they become more important. Like if you think
Yeah,
of just an application running by itself, unit tests, that's why it's the bedrock at the bottom. But in this
yeah.
weird case, it seems like there's a slightly different pyramid or different
I,
shape.
Well, I
I
think it's
never,
an inverted pyramid. Now that you say it.
well, I never, it's an interesting, so I never thought about the pyramid in terms of importance. I
Mm-hmm.
always thought about it in terms of sheer quantity. right?
I think
So
that kind of implies importance, maybe. I don't know.
uh,
Sure.
No.
Okay.
Well, like take the idea of you're going to replace Kafka with RabbitMQ or something similar, right? You'd need some unit tests around your Kafka. You're changing this Kafka reader writer with a RabbitMQ reader writer, and you'd need some unit tests around that. But that's like the only place that the actual messaging system touches the code. So then you'd need integration and a lot of end-to-end tests to make sure that the messages actually flow.
yeah.
So it's kind of it when you're doing
Yeah.
infrastructure, the pyramid inverts.
The
It's a
only
fun
thing
thought.
I'll say about a lot of end-to-end, there is a point where too many end-to-end tests, I think, are a bad thing. They take a long time to run, usually.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and you have to weigh that against, because they take a long time to run, they can slow down development. And so you need to weigh the value of the end-to-end test that you're adding against the assurance that it's giving you. Some things don't need to be an end-to-end test. A unit test or an integration test is perfectly fine. It covers the case. So you should be adding end-to-end tests for truly those seams where it's like, I can't test this in integration or unit.
It's like
That's
finding a
always the
way for
line
it
I
to
try to find.
break. Yeah, if you find a way for it to break an end-to-end test, but not a unit test, that's like a clear
Yeah.
case, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the ones that you probably found as you set up this
Yep.
test
Yeah. I
infrastructure.
mean, throughout all of the changes I made, most of the time the unit tests were, totally fine, but the
Right.
big bugs were in the end-to-end tests.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on, Rob. Is there
Thanks,
anything else you'd like to tell the audience before we wrap up?
No, sorry. Kind of a last minute thing. I wasn't prepared.
I liked it though. You said you repeated never rewrite many times, so
Keep saying that. We need
keep
it.
saying it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
I'm Isaac Askew, and that's
I'm Rob Gonnella.
and this is Never Rewrite.